everybody. This is Dr. Novak again. Welcome to my channel. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to my channel to keep up with my videos. I try to get at least 2 videos done every week for everybody. What this is about is a video that I watched called The Science of Algae. And I think the video was done by ADA Aquariums. And the whole video takes place in Hungary. The Hungarians have a lab right next to Lake Balaton. And the lab is basically a freshwater lab with a lot of, it studies limnology, which would be freshwater systems. So basically that's what this lab does. It studies limnology, and they're talking about the Lake Balaton that is in front of the lab. So as the video goes on, the first thing it says is that the Lake Balaton is a shallow lake, and it is typically a nutrient poor lake. Okay, so we understand that it's not a very deep lake, it's a big lake, but yet it's shallow. And usually it doesn't have a lot of nutrients, so they don't really have a problem with the lake. I'll get into more of the video after I finish what I'm trying to explain. So it's a nutrient poor lake. And you don't usually have problems with nutrient poor lakes than you do have nutrient rich lakes. And usually when you have a nutrient rich lake or pond, you end up with problems. And they usually say that's eutrophication. And that's what happens when you have a nutrient-rich environment. So as the video goes on, I'll get more into that. But I wanted to show you this aquarium because the aquarium here shows you a nutrient-poor aquarium. That's what this would be classified as, nutrient-poor. And how do you identify a nutrient-poor aquarium, which I'm sure that all of you now are going to be thinking, do I have a nutrient-poor aquarium or nutrient-rich aquarium? Nutrient-poor aquarium like this has very little algae problems at all, if any, and this one has none. I tested it out with the colorimeters from Hanna, and I tested for nitrates, and I tested for phosphates, and it has 0 phosphates and 0 nitrates. When I say 0, I mean 0. It has nothing that will show up on the test kits. But yet the plants are still thriving. Once a week, 2 milliliters of iron are added to the aquarium, and that's it as far as anything else. It's very hard water, and it's high in calcium. And it has nothing but cherry shrimp in it. Maybe almost 100 cherry shrimp are in this aquarium. And it has about 3 different plants. It has the flame moss, it has the crypt in it, and it also has the hydrophilia that you're looking at that looks like baby tears or Monte Carlo. It uses a can light, which puts out 400 luminous. It is a GE light bulb light I've done in my video. Puts out about 400 luminous. To give you some idea what 4,000 luminous would be, it would be like buying a Fluval 40-inch light, and that would put out over 4,000 luminous over a 48-inch tank. And the aquarium receives direct sunlight, about 5 hours of direct sunlight, starting from noon to about 5 o'clock. It gets direct sunlight. Now that's one thing in the video that they mentioned, that you don't want to put your aquarium with direct sunlight because the intensity of direct sunlight is one thing that can cause algae problems. It is so intense. But this gets direct sunlight, and it is so bright, especially in the wintertime, that if you put a radiometer by the window, it would be spinning crazy. Absolutely, spinning crazy. Substrate you're looking at is basic cosmetic. It's kitty litter, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. And in the canister filter, it uses a BCB bag like you see. And that's it. No other filtration system is used except for a skimmer. And it does get CO2, but not 30 parts per million, a little bit of CO2. I know it's higher than what the tank would naturally produce, but a lot lower than 30 parts per million. It's just enough to keep the plants going. I'm not worried about 30 parts per million. But anyway, this tank is nutrient poor. One reason it could be nutrient poor is because I don't feed it. I don't put any food in to add nitrates to it or phosphates. Another reason is it doesn't have a deep substrate of any sort. Like I said, substrate maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. So we don't have to worry about any substrate problems. It would just be the canister, which uses a BCB, which is an anoxic filter. So let's look at this, and now we'll compare it to Lake Balaton. Now, when we compare it to Lake Balaton, the thing they talk about is it's a nutrient-poor lake. This Hungarian lake is especially poor in phosphorus. This is a factor that typically limits the growth of algae. Algae needs nutrients to grow, and that is something that is universal, independent of size of the ecosystem. So basically, what they're saying in the video is that phosphorus or phosphates is the limiting factor to growing algae. And it doesn't matter what size of aquarium you're using or size of the lake or pond. That is going to be the limiting factor. It could be why this hydrophilia that I'm pointing to could be so small or not really growing as big as it should be, like here in the 90-gallon. This is the same plant, but as you can see, it has grown massive in this aquarium. It is growing in the water and out of the water, this hydrophilia. In fact, I have to cut it down to keep it under control so it doesn't get, too long. But that is the same plant. It's hard to believe when you look at it like, wow, it looks like baby tears or Monte Carlo or something. But yet this is a nutrient poor aquarium. And the other aquarium, it's not a nutrient-rich aquarium either. But for some reason, that hydrophilia has grown to the point where other hobbyists have told me that's how it will grow. It will get very long and lengthy. And so it's growing the way everyone told me it would grow. Where in this tank, in the nutrient-poor tank, with 0 nitrates and 0 phosphates, look how small it is. Does that have something to do with the nitrates and phosphates being at 0? It could be. I don't know. I'm not an aquatic botanist, so I can't really tell you. But anyway, it's interesting to see that this lake is nutrient poor. But then they say, however, there are some cases when dissolved oxygen concentrations decline so low during the summer months, which causes problems in the form of phosphorus released from the settlement in Lake Balaton. That statement made by the limnologists is an interesting statement, isn't it? That when oxygen levels begin to go lower and lower because of the summer months where oxygen levels start decreasing as depth happens, that the settlement starts producing phosphates and phosphorus. Now, this production of phosphorus from the settlement in Lake Balaton causes heavy eutrophication in the lake. Okay, so you got a nutrient-poor lake, but as oxygen levels decline, and as it goes deeper into the lake, the settlement now, oxygen levels have declined to the point that they are producing phosphorus as a food source for algae. And eutrophication, in this case, when primary producer organisms like algae can grow with a supply of inorganic nutrients in the water. So That's exactly what's happening. If you're making an inorganic nutrient, such as ammonia or phosphates or phosphorus, from your substrate, because this relates to our aquariums. You have a substrate, and if it has a tight matrix like that of dirt or sand or whatever, and oxygen can't get through it, you're going to have a producer of ammonia and phosphates. This is going to then make your aquarium have algae problems. Your substrate alone could be doing that. And we know that as a substrate, like you have the glass and you have your substrate right on top of the glass, we know at that point level, fluids cannot move very freely. That glass is hindering the movement of fluids, and therefore those fluids become to the point where they become anaerobic in those fluids. We know that ORP will suffer when you can't have oxygen levels, because a high ORP is correlated to oxygen levels. You want to get oxygen levels higher, then your ORP will also increase with those oxygen levels. If you have your oxygen levels go lower and lower and lower, your ORP will follow suit. So a very low ORP means your oxygen levels in your substrate are dropping to the point that you have a very low ORP. It's in correlation with each other. When you use a plenum, those oxygen levels stay high enough where in the plenum itself, you still have a high ORP in that void because you have fluids that are still moving with oxygen. In other words, it doesn't become 100% depleted of oxygen, and therefore you do not have those oxidizers in there that are making this inorganic nutrients that cause algae problems. So how do people try to solve that problem, right? We all know how they try to solve the problem. They put more plants in. They have to put plants in to have a vascular system of roots. Putting in, let's say like this flame moth, that's not going to help you. That's going to be useless. You need something to get the nutrients out of the substrate, right? They will even emit it. Therefore, you need a lot of plant life in that substrate with a lot of root system, well developed, to take away the nutrients that your substrate is making. No different than Lake Balaton, in Hungary. No different. It doesn't matter the size, as the limnologist has stated. Size doesn't mean anything. The same thing happens whether you have an aquarium or whether you have a lake. Same thing is happening in our aquariums. If that substrate is becoming a producer of inorganic nutrients, you have eutrophication happening. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily just because you have algae blooms that it equals eutrophication. There are several other forms of eutrophication. Eutrophication also could be an indication of cyanobacteria, which is a lot of people classify it as algae. And cyanobacteria could be good or bad. Remember, there is good cyanobacteria and there's bad cyanobacteria. Chlorpa, there's, spirina, for example, is cyanobacteria. Good. You can eat it. It's good. Fish eat it. Okay. There are bad cyanobacteria, like the blue-green algae that we see, or that purplish algae that I showed you in my goldfish tank grown on the piece of wood. That's bad. And why was I getting that? Well, I was using sand. And in 2 years, it finally started, causing a problem in that aquarium. Fluids were not moving. The sand compacted. I did a video on that. So when we set up aquariums like that, like I myself have set up aquariums like that, I'll admit it, but I only have a 25% success rate if I put the substrate directly on the bottom. I've talked to other YouTubers who have done the same thing, and they say the exact same thing. 25% is all their success rate is. And that's the same as me. I thought that's not very good with a 25% success rate. I'm sure there's people out there who are going to say, oh, I've done it lots of times and I've been successful every time. Well, I haven't. So what am I doing wrong compared to what are you doing wrong? I throw the substrate at the bottom of the aquarium. But this may explain to us something, right? Okay, this may explain to us something when we watch videos, right? And the people set up their aquarium and it's all set up full of plants and everything's going great and they're showing, oh, look how great it is, look how great. And then about a year later or so, all of a sudden they're getting algae growing on their plants and they say, oh, I've neglected this aquarium and unfortunately I'm going to have to take it down. I've neglected it. It's my fault. Or was it the substrate causing a problem after it's been set up for over a year and it is a phosphate producer instead of a user? And therefore, these phosphates are going into the aquarium because they don't have enough rooted plants to utilize that as a food source, the nitrates and phosphates. Like the aquarium you're looking at here, which has 0 nitrates and 0 phosphates. So this definitely is showing you a nutrient-poor aquarium. Just like they talk in the video about the lake being a nutrient-poor lake until summertime comes when oxygen levels begin to become depleted because of, we know that water carries less oxygen the warmer it becomes. And we also know that as oxygen levels begin to drop, ORP also begins to drop. It's in correlation with each other. If one drops, the other starts dropping with it. You cannot have a high ORP if your oxygen levels are dropping to dangerous levels in your lake. And I think they say even in there that it drops to the point where you need like 8 parts per million. It drops to even lower than that continuously, even for in the settlement of the lake. It even drops even lower to points in the lake. Same as our aquarium. So that's why I wanted to do this video, was basically to show you that the problems we have in our aquarium are no different than the problems that happen in lakes. It's the same. Even though the ecosystems are smaller and one is very large, you still have the exact same problem in both ecosystems, and it doesn't change because you need to keep fluids moving through your settlement or substrate in order to prevent oxygen levels from going too low to non-existent. You got to get them low so you can have anoxic conditions, but you don't want to get the oxygen level so low that you have anaerobic conditions. In order to prevent the anaerobic conditions, what do? They fill the tank full of plants, root plants. Okay, like the hydrophilia you're seeing here. Plants that have a lot of roots that will grow into the substrate. Your Amazon swords, things like this. Things that can grow a lot of roots into the substrate to keep that substrate open, to actually try to get some oxygen there and to try to use the nutrients that the substrate is producing. Makes sense. It just makes very common sense that if you want a thick substrate to grow plants real good, you still have to have fluids moving through it. But it's that stupid glass that hinders and stops that movement of fluids. So if your plants aren't working 100% complete, you wind up with low ORP in the substrate, low oxygen levels, and of course, you end up with a problem of, a phosphate producer, and you don't know it. You're scratching your head saying, well, I'm reading low phosphates in the water column. Yeah, but what are your phosphates in your substrate? What are your ammonia levels in the substrate itself? You can't measure them because we don't know how much of that gets released into the water column to aid in the production of algae. You get what I'm saying? So that, when it starts getting released into the water column, the algae then could take hold and start growing all over your plants because your substrate has a very low ORP and low oxygen levels and affects the whole ecosystem. So that's it for this video. Until next time, happy fish keeping and thank you for watching.